Awesome. Well, welcome, sweetie. We are so excited to have you. Why don't
Thank you.
you
I'm
introduce,
excited to be here.
thank you. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your genius zone?
Sure. My name is Andrea Hipps, and I am a certified divorce coach, certified divorce transition and recovery coach, and also a licensed social worker. And I help moms move from overwhelm into embracing what's next with regard to their divorce. So I work with people who are in the do I or don't I phase of this determining whether or not they want to move forward with divorce. Some of them are in the messy middle, they can't quite get it straight. And some of them are 4, 5, even 10 years out from their divorce and are still being chased by something nagging them that isn't quite yet resolved. And so I work with them to open up new spaces inside of themselves so that the divorce is truly in the past and not informing their present.
Oh, I love that. And I love how
Yeah.
you've broken it down into the different stages. Like, that's so important because so often healing or transformation is like, I can help you with this step, but then there's no conversation about what's next. And then you kind of get thrown into it or feel like the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, or you don't really know where to go. So I love that you just have addressed the whole journey of it. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And while there are definitely some continuous skills that you need in all three of those phases, there are skills specific to each section that are also really key to nail down if you would like to experience sort of the level of freedom that most people would like to have after they go through the process.
Mhm. Why don't you tell us? You were sharing with me some insane statistics about divorce and about a certain day around divorce. Can you tell us about some of those stats?
Yes, most people don't know that there is actually a National Divorce Day in America. It happens to fall on the first business day after our end of year holidays. And it's designated National Divorce Day not because we celebrate divorce, but because it is the day when most attorneys' offices start to see an uptick in inquiries around divorce filings. So people sort of hang on through the end of the year to get through the holidays. And then when they get to the new year, they want to start moving into that part of the process.
And do you feel like there are a few driving factors for why people wait, like other than family time with the holidays? Like, why do people wait?
For sure. Yes, it's partly the holidays. I think it's also has sometimes it has an involvement due to their tax status. We want to close out continue or we want to close out years as a in a married filing situation, and then you can file the next year as a single. Some people like to wait until their spouses have received their commission for the year, and that
Really?
counts in their settlement. There's lots of sort of above board and below board reasons that people will choose to manipulate the timing of their divorce.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I just never would have even considered that. And it blows my mind also about like National Divorce Day. Like, I just
Yeah, I think
interesting.
people really see divorce as the legal process that it is, and it is certainly a legal process, and you will at times need legal advice to pursue the best path for yourself as it relates to finances, as it relates to custody. But there's also this emotional side of divorce, and I don't know that people spend as much time thinking through the investments and the professionals that they need to have around them in order to support that side, which frankly is a way longer side than
Yeah.
the legal, right? The legal you can wrap up in 1 to 2 years, depending on how contentious it is. But the emotional part and what keeps stirring in you, for some people, is unresolved for a lifetime. And we've all met those people who you would introduce them as, that lady, the divorced one.
Mhm.
And it's almost as if their personalities lead with the fact that they're divorced. They're distinguished by that, and they're not able to let loose of it. And so I like to work with people in ways that they can start to identify even within themselves as single
Mhm.
rather than divorced, because even the word divorced attaches us to what we were married to.
Right.
Single puts us in a new space to welcome what's next.
I love that. It's about the identity. Like, are you identifying with this story of being a divorced person, or are you truly moving on, like healing while moving forward and stepping into the next phase of your life and your chapter? And it affects
Right.
everyone around you. And so I already know the answer to this, but for our listeners, most people on this path have experienced something in their personal life that got them moving in this direction professionally. Why don't you share some of your story with us?
Sure. Yeah, my own divorce was finalized in 2013, and my kids live in a shared family with two addresses between their dads and my homes, and we enjoy a very meaningful relationship, their dad and I, and a supportive relationship as it relates to our kids. But it wasn't always that way. There were times in that period of recovery where I couldn't eat, where I couldn't sleep, where I couldn't think straight, where I couldn't keep track of what was going on at work, let alone in my kids' lives and in their schools. There was sort of a massive shutdown of my internal systems, and things that were previously reliable in my life in terms of how my body functioned, in terms of how my mind functioned, were no longer reliable. And there was a tipping point at which that started to shift into something that was going to not be sustainable. I mean, it really was like, I think I might actually, the phrase die of a broken heart, it really did feel like I might die of a broken heart here. And so
Daily life look like, not to interrupt you, but what
no,
did
please
your
go ahead.
daily life look like? Were you, like, your responsibilities with your kids, like, was it easier to let the dishes go, or like be late to errands, or were you in bed a lot? Like, what did that look like for you?
For sure. Yes. I think, like most women who are moving through divorce, there's a lot of buffering that went on, whether that was eating poorly, not eating enough,
Mm-hmm.
not being wise with alcohol consumption,
Yeah.
not being wise with finances, not being wise with rest, not being wise with even connecting with people. I think there's a period of time for most people when they go through divorce where they really hole off from other people and they aren't doing what's necessary in order to stay connected. So, it's a wild and painful ride. And I think if you talk to anybody who's gone through a divorce, they have sort of the battle scars of the times when they really weren't sure if they were going to be able to pull it together. And I certainly stand in line with those women and celebrate that something better emerged.
Mm-hmm.
But in those initial days, your body it flips over into fight or flight. Your amygdala says, I'm here, I'm reporting for duty, you're threatened, and I'm showing up. And that starts sort of right at the beginning when you start to see things are going to unravel and you start looking at your future and wondering, how are we going to pull this off? And so, unfortunately, for divorced women, we end up staying in a almost a permanent state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
And over time, as you know better than I do, over time, that starts to wear us down. The exhaustion and the fatigue then contributes to the inability to think, the inability to do useful self-care instead of buffering. And it really becomes this deteriorating experience, physically, mentally, spiritually. And so I have a lot of sympathy for people who find themselves in that space because they literally have run out. They've run out of steam.
Absolutely.
And so it takes a lot to retrain the brain to be able to come back into that creative side again and start to work with the life and really start to tell yourself, I'm safe. The threat is not as big now. Part of the threat has passed. What part of the threat do I need to keep? Which part of the threat can I set down and start to regain some more homeostasis between the two sides of my brain instead of just operating out of one side all the time? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I have a question for you, because I don't know very much about the 3 stages that you were explaining that you work through. I think it was 3.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do you find, like, where do people seem to get hung up the most? Like, I've known a few divorced women who would fit the explanation that you're discussing, and I've
Sure.
also been divorced.
Mm.
Um, and so I've seen a few things. Like, one situation, it seemed like her whole identity was like being married. And so like without
Mhm.
that, there was like, she couldn't even wrap her head around like, what does her own life look like at that point?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I think I've known other situations where just like it devastated their confidence and their worth.
Mhm.
Like, I thought I was going to be with this person for the rest of my life. How could it go this way? And they just go so low that they struggle to pull themselves out. um do you think that that's like just dependent on the situation, or do you see one being more common than the other, or what does it look like for you, kind of the groups that you could say that people struggle with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think at the baseline of every divorced heart is a long or short walk to acceptance.
Mhm.
And I think that path is longer for people who, like the first friend that you mentioned, really found an identity as a married person, and for whom the structure of family is revered.
Mhm.
And when you go through a divorce, you are battling not only the sense of loss, but the sense of shame that comes from it. And often at that point in time, people aren't even grieving the person that they're divorced from. They're grieving the structure that they lost, that they don't belong in what they consider to be a normal situation anymore. And so the path to acceptance there is, how do I start to imagine my differently shaped family being a family I can dream about and a family I can get excited about? And how do I start contributing to that instead of just going, well, this is really crummy every other week and they go away. And then I'm kind of a weirdo and I'm out here and my friends have their kids and they're married and I'm just going to be here and I'm going to cry and I'm going to, how do you start to go, and yes to this life, and yes to this life? And we talk about, when I coach people, I talk about when people go to learn improv, right? They get put up on stage, and the one lesson they teach everybody when they're learning improv is to say yes and. That people are going to put material up there, and you're going to be like, what? I'm not going there. No. But the trick is to say yes and to ask yourself, how can I say not only yes to the situation, but how can I start adding to the situation? And I call that moving from reactor to creator. And I think people who really get in those situations, like what you were talking about with your friend, is they feel they are at the mercy of what they've been handed, a divorce and a life that they didn't want. And so how do they shift themselves back into a place where they're starting to create a reality that actually has some recognizable pieces to it that can still mean very much to them, even though they left the tradition of what they wanted?
Right. And also believing that this doesn't have to be the end. Like, there can always be another relationship more fulfilling. And like you're saying, yes, and like, yes, this is
Mm-hmm.
my situation now, and what's next for me, and what do I want? Starting to care about asking yourself those questions, I think, is just so important. Going from like, what even is normal? Like, just because
Right.
like society says it's normal, I think terminology that's really supportive there is empowered. How can I
Mm-hmm.
make my situation the most empowered situation that it is, no matter what it looks like? Because there's all kinds of different home styles. It's,
Mm-hmm.
are the family members feeling empowered from the situation? And that leads
Right.
us perfectly into like just everything I want to listen to you talk about. Tell us about what your situation looks like now and how you got there.
Sure. Well, like I was saying earlier in my story, I had just a very unsustainable lifestyle. And I did feel very much at the mercy of it. I didn't feel like I was making choices to not be able to hold my food, or, just feel so sad. And I'm sad because something was done to me, right? Like, I'm just going to be sad because that thing was done to me and it shouldn't be this way. And if it shouldn't be this way, then I can't enjoy it. I mean, there was really a mental clog there that wouldn't allow any sort of new breath to start to get through it. And so it was very interesting. I went to see a spiritual director at some point in the process, and she encouraged me to think about what it would look like to want deep peace and freedom for my former spouse, regardless of what that meant for me. Now, that just, no. I mean, that was a big no. No, I don't want deep peace and freedom for him. I want suffering, torture, and pain for him, you know, at that point in time. And so I was like, I'm curious enough. I'd like to know the path to get there. Tell me more. And she said, I'd like for you to consider a gratitude practice specifically for your former spouse. I want you to do 3 gratitudes every morning before you get out of bed, no repeats. And people don't do that when they're getting divorced. If they do anything before they get out of bed, when they're going through a divorce and thinking about their former partner, they think about a list of hundreds of things that they don't like about them. And so to have her switch me into really contemplating, where can I find gratitude for this person, was hard. Yeah. And let me tell you, there were some long mornings in bed in the beginning. And over time, and I was actually just sharing this with my kids' dad recently, over time, what I noticed is as I started to get really into those gratitudes, is I got really sad that I missed the opportunity to really loudly celebrate those things when we were together. Oh, and so it was, and what's interesting about it is, and when I talk to my clients about it, we're the chief narrators. And if I have any clients listening to this, they're going to know this language. We're the chief narrators of our family, right? We tell the story. Our kids want to live in a good story. They don't want to live in a mom and dad screwed up and now we're here in this crappy leftover family that nobody really wants to be in. And then we can feel the hostility between everybody, right? So as the chief narrator, you need to know the characters intimately, right? And I know as moms, we know our kids inside and out. There are people. But as we start to distance ourselves from our former spouse, we make them out to be one-dimensional. And they are the villain. And that is the only role that we let them inhabit. Well, that's fine until you need to start telling a story to these kids. Yeah. And your story is laced with, inside of you, thinking that this person is strictly a villain. You can't tell a good story that way. You simply can't. And so when you start to give equal airtime to both the blessings and the difficulties of your other parent, you can start to tell a story that your children actually want to inhabit. So as an example, my own kids, we always say, don't go to a hardware store and buy lipstick. Don't go looking for lipstick in a hardware store. You don't come to mom when you want to stay up really late at night watching movies. You know why? I'm going to fall asleep. Go to your dad. Your dad is the fun one. You know what I love about your dad? He's the one who's always bringing up the fun stuff you guys should do. You know what else I love about your dad? He calms everything down. When you're going crazy, when life is feeling nuts, he's the one that does that. You know, I have a long list of all the things he can be and won't be. I have it just like every other divorced woman. We carry those, they're precious to us, right? But I'm growing an equally longer list about the blessings that he's bringing to my children's lives. And I want to be able to tell my kids, love your dad. I free you to love your dad. I don't put what's between him and I between you and him.
That's the most beautiful thing I have honestly ever heard. Like,
you're so kind.
Because I just know so many people who are living the opposite, who are stuck in the struggle, who are stuck in the demonizing like conversations. And sometimes it's indirect from like one parent speaking badly about the other in front of the children. But a lot of times it becomes so habitually indirect that it becomes very direct. And the person speaking doesn't even notice the shift. Like they think they're still being like kind of indirect about it. They don't realize how like blunt force trauma it is to these kids, like right to their faces. So I just love, like, I just think this is one of the most important conversations of like the decade, honestly. Like you were telling me, I believe some stats around like divorce with Corona was that it? I'm like,
Oh, just, yeah, obviously there's just a tremendous number of people who are reevaluating their relationships. I think we're reevaluating any number of things in our lives, including our relationships now. And so that has led to a number of people pursuing divorce filings because they're looking around their house and going, this isn't working for me anymore. And the hard part is, you know, I always talk to my clients about marriage being this triangle with commitment and passion and intimacy on its corners. And by intimacy, I just mean that you like the person. And typically what I find is that the passion drops off first, and you're left with the commitment and the intimacy. And plenty of people can continue to have that sort of committed, I like you relationship for decades, and they bury each other happily married. But for some people, they start to not like the person. And then all they're left with is this commitment part at the top. And when you just have commitment without these other anchors, it's a very empty experience. And that is not
commitment at the top, because it's top heavy. If you take away the legs, it's going to just fall on your head and feel like a cage.
Right. And so it doesn't mean that when you get to the point where you just have commitment that you need to file for divorce. In no way do I believe that's true. I think there are absolutely intentional ways and far better professionals to help you reinfuse life into those other components of your marriage. But I think when people then remove the commitment, like many people are doing during Corona, they leave the structure of this triangle of what the relationship was at one point in time, and they move into nothing. There's no map for how you're supposed to do a relationship with someone that you passionately don't like, that you are not committed to, other than to the extent that you have children together, and that you just went through a brutal process where both of your names were put next to each other with the word versus between them. I mean, it's an adversarial process to begin with to get divorced. And now you're over here going, oh, sure, let's just parent together. Nobody's setting up a structure for that. And so in my coaching, we start to set up another structure, and it's the same triangle. We're just pursuing it in different ways after that. We're not pursuing commitment to the other person, but we are committed to finding gratitudes about our experience with them. That's going to help us start to like them again. We're going to be passionate about what it means to raise full-hearted kids that have equal access to both of their parents. Those things take practice and work. And so, like what you talk about in the friends that you have that just sort of end up in this dark place, that is the natural course of divorce. You have to exert a tremendous amount of energy in the opposite direction to build anything other than what you're describing. So I have a lot of sympathy for those people, because it is brutally hard work, especially when you were married to someone who Bill Eddy calls a high conflict person. A person who blames, a person who has unmanaged emotions, crazy behaviors, a person who has all or nothing thinking. These people make life very hard. And so to even think about wanting to give them any sort of gratitude, grace, or attention in your divorce relationship is almost off the board and too crazy to even think about. But like we were talking about, our kids suffer when we don't push through these really hard issues. And when we start to carve out that we don't need the other person to participate in order for this to go well. And that's the part that I really try to hit home with, is that this is not about building a relationship with another person. They don't want the relationship. You got divorced for a reason. How do you build a relationship with yourself about that other person that lets you bless the relationship? It's one way.
Yes, that is so, so crucial, because so many people get caught up in, like, you know, especially something extremely painful like an affair.
Yes.
Like something really like abusive, like how it's like in the beginning, it's like, there's nothing I want to be grateful for this person. It was nothing but like
right.
the low end of the scale the whole time. But there's so much you learn about yourself in that process. There's so much you learn about what you want, what you don't want, what truly makes you feel loved and seen, and how you like to show love. Like there's so much. So even if you have to start like with what the relationship gave you, so you can even get into finding gratitude for this person. But I think it's just when you say a minute ago you said there's more qualified people to help you infuse love like into your relationship. I think you just gave people the best tool to do that on their own. And sure, there might need to be more assistance deeper down the road.
Yeah.
But to really just finding that gratitude, like if you can do it when you are in that place. And I love how open you talk about, I was revengeful and vengeful, and I didn't
Absolutely.
want good things for him. Like, kind of cursing him in my mind every day when I woke up. We've all
It's
been those
primal.
people.
It's completely primal what happens to people.
Yeah. And
that's
so,
for people who I want to just honor the people who start amicable. I didn't start, by throwing knives, and neither did he. And I have to always say hats off to him for everything he has contributed to our relationship, because he has worked very hard in order to make it work for us as well. And I feel very blessed that he can do that. I just think that people can get sort of wrapped in a spiral that they're not even aware that they're in anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And I also want to be careful to say, you can't just slap on a gratitude and your divorce is awesome.
Right.
There are some people for whom deep level therapy is needed to recover from the various types of abuse that they've encountered. And I just want to encourage anybody who's getting divorced, you think only of a lawyer, you need a big team around you. You need a big team. And that includes a therapist, that can include a coach, that might include a financial advisor, just to be really careful with yourself as you're going through it.
Do you have any recommendations? Because I know people who have gone down that route and didn't get paired with the right professional and ended up still stuck in their cycle, like paying all of this money to different professionals, lawyers, therapists, mediators, all of these things, and it not being helpful. So do you have any tips on how to find the right people for your team, or how to maybe notice some red flags if like maybe this person isn't the best fit for you?
Sure, it's a wonderful question. And not to promote divorce coaching as the answer to everything, but it certainly is a helpful start for people. When we think about divorce and our typical knee-jerk reaction is to call a lawyer, I think that's where we take our first step into giving our divorce process to someone else. And I like to remind people that the first thing you need to do before you call a lawyer is get out a journal and get out a piece and get out a pen and answer the question, what do I want my life with this person to look and feel like 5 or 10 years from now? And to really get specific, not on how they're going to change, but how you want to feel in relationship to them. That is where you start. A divorce coach, if you bring in a divorce coach at that time, can really help you to explore where you want to end up and help you identify and target the professionals that will support your destination. When you walk into a lawyer and just say, I got to get divorced, help me out. And there are so many parts about the legal process that we abdicate, that we don't understand. And so a divorce coach can even help you start to frame the list of questions you need to be asking before you even hand over $1 to an attorney, before you hand over $1 to a therapist, right? Because therapy and coaching are two very distinct things. And so I really do encourage people, not just because I'm a divorce coach, but there are some people who are really great at divorce coaching, that beginning part of the process where you're assembling a team that can support you in getting where you want to go. I think some people wake up and they're like, I don't even know how I got here. Yeah. Because you are being forced to make very important decisions at a time in your life when you are extremely spent. That's not a good recipe for ending up where you want to be.
Right. It leads to, I know people who've signed papers that affected their life and like didn't know how to backpedal. There was no real way to go back
right.
from that. And so I love that. And like, honestly, I know a whole world of coaches, but I don't know anyone other than you. And if you don't mind, can I share where we met?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Awesome. We just met like this week in the TV, Be on TV boot camp. And so when I say just you, I mean, not like you're amazing. I like until this week, I didn't even know divorce coaching was a thing. And
Yeah.
so even in all of the world of coaches that I know. And so again, I just think this is one of the most important conversations to have, because whether you're the person who has the thought of divorce first, or you're the person, if you get surprised with it by your partner, it like you said, it sends you into fight or flight, but that means your brain is not in the capacity to make decisions that are going to get you where you want to go, like you're saying.
Right. And a coach can help you walk your brain back over to that logical side and really help you gather yourself. And I think that's one of the things I felt like I used the word overwhelm a lot when I was walking through my divorce. And I think it was because you never quite felt like you had your hands wrapped around the situation. And I think that's what divorce coaches do best. And I'll just plug divorcesupporthelp.com is a sort of a clearinghouse of certified divorce coaches if you want to find one in your area. Most of us do a virtual practice, and so my practice is national and I see people that way. But if you're looking for something face-to-face, divorcesupporthelp.com is a great place to look.
Oh, thank you for sharing that with us. That's
Yeah.
so important. But yeah, I hope everyone calls you. I think you're just
You're so kind.
so wonderful. And the reason I'm not just saying that because you're on the show. I'll back it up with your story. Like, tell us more about what your situation looks like. And I do want to lead in with knowing, you'd already mentioned that it's not about building a relationship with this person. It's about building your relationship with how you feel about this person and how your mind talks about this person, and how your mouth talks about this person. But you're very blessed. You shared with me some of the details of what your family situation looks like and some of your goals for the future when you sat down and asked yourself, how do I want to feel about this person in 5 or 10 years? Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. About like wedding day, is that what we talked about? Yes. Yeah, I early on had a mantra that was to stay classy. And I didn't really know what that meant other than I wanted to stay classy. And so I started thinking about what I wanted to look and feel like on the day of my children's weddings. And I didn't pick that because I thought they'd get married. This is not really relevant. It was just more like an event up there in the future where I'm still going to absolutely be in relationship with their dad. And I pictured that day wanting to be about my kids. We've all been to a wedding where the parents are divorced, and the parents are divorced. And it's a really awkward thing at a wedding to be thinking about the parents that are divorced instead of the kids that are getting married. And so I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be fully background and fully supportive and in a relationship that didn't take attention away from their relationship. And I also wanted to invite my first husband to sit next to me. I wanted to be able to dance with him at the reception and be proud of what I offered him. And I wanted to swell with pride when I watched him walk my girls down the aisle, if they chose to be walked down the aisle. And I am absolutely on my way to that. It was and is a shaping decision to choose to live from that destination. And, they always say begin with the end in mind, but it really is. When you can picture that, all the decisions I'm making today need to be in support of that. And so I say it's like reverse engineering your life. How do you reverse engineer the situation so that you end up in that place and you start to look at everything through that lens? And so what that means is we do a lot of things together. And like most divorce families, I started out faking it till you make it. And that is a very valid starting place. And for your listeners, if that's where you're at right now, I don't want you to hear this as you need to hurry up and move on. Faking it till you make it is a noble place to be, because there are a lot of people who aren't even bothering to fake it. So start with the faking it, where you're being kind, where you're
there.
Absolutely. And you're smiling and you're saying kind things, and maybe it's right through gritted teeth, but you're still doing it. That will be honored. That effort will be honored, and it is building something. The problem is when you use the fake it till you make it strategy for longer than you can fake it. And have talked to clients before who have been like, I was so great. And then I just like blew up and I just said all the things I promised myself I'd never say about their dad in front of them. And I'm like, yeah, because your willpower runs out. We know it's a finite amount of energy we get for willpower. And when you stretch that over the lifetime of a child, 18 years, or some of us who are, getting divorced when our kids are 5, you got 10 years left, 13 years left where you are still in a lot of relationship with this person. Your willpower will run out. And so how can we start to take on some practices, intentional practices? And I say practice because you have to practice it, to develop a way to connect the good intentions that your mind is putting out there, which again, I say I honor greatly, and your heart, which is still dark and wounded. And so this connection is one that I'm very fascinated by, where I really want people to be able to say, we're going to dad's. And it comes out of here and not just out of here. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the art of a beautiful divorce. If you have to do it, you do it well, and you do the hard work to figure out how to give that. And one of the ways we do that is, like we were talking about, gratitude, where you have to genuinely start to prefer certain parts of that person again and start to see them in the way that your kids do, and maybe in the way that their parents see them. But it's hard work.
Absolutely. And what I love about this, and you might even address this in your coaching, I'm not sure because we haven't talked about it, but you're definitely doing it indirectly, is how complicated dating is after a divorce. Like, I know people who are in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, and their 60s, and dating after a divorce with kids is still like one of the most complicated things. Because everybody has these unspoken expectations and just all of this stuff that gets in the way. But what I love is, without even considering talking about dating, if one or both, that'd be amazing, divorced partners had a divorce coach, by learning these practices to with your partner, it just like automatically makes that whole dating afterwards less complicated, because you're more heart-centered. You're able to be more heart-centered with your ex, with your children, and with your partner, and with what could potentially be a sensitive situation if it goes chaotically.
Yes, right.
Do you talk with your clients about that, or do you have any experience in that world?
Yeah, and what I warn people about most with dating after divorce is most people engage in what I like to call reactive dating. Mm-hmm. And the reactive dating that they're doing is, I want to date anyone that doesn't look anything like what I just was married to. Mm-hmm. And so they are picking picking someone for what they are not. And that is still being very much divorced and not single. When we move more into being single, which is where I like for people to get more rooted in before they start dating, they are able to be creatively dating. I want to see these types of qualities. It's not about, I want to get rid of these. It's, what do I want? Not what am I saying no to, but what can I say yes to? And that's the thing that I most want my clients to really check in themselves when they're doing it, because you've seen, there's a reason second marriages don't last. It's because the first one ended and they married the opposite, and the opposite wasn't what they needed either. So, there has to be some more reflective work done in between those two stages. And I think because people go through such tremendous pain with their divorce, and because they suffer for so long, as soon as they get permission to run about again, they do. And everybody has their sort of wild post-divorce time. But when they get serious about it, I really like for people to do a lot of reflection about what kind of a mate they're looking for and what they would like to attract to themselves.
Absolutely. Do you have any big wins that your clients have had that you can share with us?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think one of my favorites is, I have one client who really struggled a lot with welcoming the other woman into her life. And this was a person who came into their marriage before their marriage was done, and then stayed in relationship with her former partner and was around her kids.
Yeah.
And that was a tremendous, yes, it is very common. And it is a real struggle for people to learn how to live in that in a way that doesn't stall out any hopes of making that relationship comfortable for the kids. And so just sort of watching her as she started to think through the double binds. For example, one of the things she said was, I can't stand how welcoming my kids are of her. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because the thing I'm celebrating right now is that you raised kids that are welcoming. You got the thing you wanted as a mom. You raised a welcoming kid. Well, they're just loving her, and she doesn't even she just shows up and they're just going to like her. And I'm like, yeah, you know why? Because you're a great mom and you raise kids who want to make space for new people. The thing you most want is for your kids to say, no, we hate her too. I don't think, and she was like, no, I don't. I really do. I guess I am kind of proud that they're doing that. And so then that takes the steam out of it. And you can start to go, okay, well then what are the places where I can welcome this? And it's not like we're welcoming them like, hey, let's braid each other's hair and be sisters. It's how do I allow it? And allow is a word that I use constantly with my clients, because we want to resist and we want to say no and we want to close off, especially in relationships where affairs were involved. But in this woman's case, it was just really fun to watch her soften and realize that she wasn't losing anything by letting her kids love this other woman. She was, in fact, letting go of a lot of her own pain that was caused from the resistance, and then created her own suffering. So,
oh, that's absolutely fascinating and so beautiful. And I want to hear more. Can you share more wins with us?
Sure. I have a client who really does not like her former partner. I mean, I probably have tons of clients that are like that, but one in particular comes to mind. And we have been working a lot on gratitude and on identifying the ways that this person can actually contribute to family life. Maybe not to the level that she hoped, and maybe not to the level that would be even useful and helpful for her kids, but that there are certain components of that person that can be built upon, blessed on behalf of her children. And so I watched her go through a situation recently that was particularly troublesome with one of her kids. And she said, as she was narrating that story to her child, that she was able to tell the story very differently because the gratitude she had done for that person were so fresh in her mind. And so she told the story very differently, and from a less fake it till you make it place in her heart, and from an actual place where she felt like she was a little startled that she felt like she'd defended him in a way. And so that was sort of a great win too.
Oh my gosh, your wins are so awesome, because they apply to so many people's situations that we don't have these conversations in this way. Like, you're able to explain it so eloquently and just
So
in
kind.
a way that I think people can relate to so much. I don't want to ask you over and over and over, so I'll ask you one more time if you have any more wins you can share with us.
Well, I don't just work with women, I also work with men. And one of the things I was working with one male client before was the idea that your X is your Y. I really don't like the word X. I use former partner a lot more. I use kid's dad or kid's mom a lot more often. And I say your X is your Y because one of the things that he was able to realize during our work together was this relationship, as much as he wanted to depart from it, was really the only doorway into the better parts of himself that he had been looking for quite some time, even outside the marriage. And so once he was able to sort of receive that his X was his Y, and by Y I mean WHY, his reason for figuring out what was going on with him, he was able to live alongside that relationship with a little more comfort, because it was now his tool. And he was able to go, you know what, when she does or doesn't do this, it takes me right back into here. and the thing that I need to most work on. And so I love when people can start to see that, because then they are doing less reactive, trying to change the other person, and they're doing a lot more trying to win inside themselves.
Oh, that's so, so amazing. This is just one of my
Yeah.
favorite conversations I think I've ever had in my whole life.
Oh, you're so kind.
So empowering, and just like, I don't even have to ask you if you have any tips, because you've just peppered them in the whole way for us. I hope so many listeners can just take this conversation and just be so empowered, and hopefully reach out to you if they're feeling like they need help in their situation. Because I mean, if I was going through this, I would want you in a heartbeat. I just think that you're so amazing, and I'm so grateful that you've been on this show with us today. Let's talk about what it looks like for people to work with you. How are you offering your services?
Sure. Yeah. I typically start interested clients on it's called a breaking and remaking starter package. It consists of 4 sessions where we tackle the issues that are standing on tiptoe the most for you during those session times. And then in between sessions, I give you custom-made homework based on your situations with skills, tools, and mindset shifts that you need to be contemplating as you move forward. And so there's some real basics that people need to always come back to, and I try to deliver those basics up front in that starter package. And there are people who do that starter package and they're able to move on with the tools that I gave them and just keep returning to them as they encounter new situations, and we're done with the relationship. There are other people who after the starter package want to continue, and I offer signature and executive programs that are 6 months, 12 months long if you want to deepen in a particular area of your recovery. So it really is driven a lot by what you do outside the session. And I love the sessions, and I love working with people, and I love challenging them. And my whole practice is built on the art of kintsugi. It's Japanese ceramic art where practitioners take broken pieces of plates and bowls, and they piece them back together, and they lay gold in them. And by laying gold in them, the pieces become even more valuable than they were when they were more perfectly made. And so that's what I want for my divorced women that I work with, is for us to lay gold to create a structure that can hold their future family, hold themselves well. And so that's kind of the process that I like to take when I'm working with people.
That is so amazing. And I love that you shared that you also work with men, because I feel like women in general are more all about hiring the coaches. Like I think it's because we're talkative. Like we want to like talk out our stuff, and men are more like, let me just like roll it around in my head and I'll figure it out on my own. And so I love that you specifically told us a win that you have with one of your male clients. And this, just the way that you've even structured everything sounds just so wonderful. And I love that, I don't know how to say it, but that Japanese art form as well is one.
Yes, kintsugi, yes.
So I am just obsessed with the fact that that's how you relate to your work. Like that's amazing.
I think it's great for people to be known for their seams. And I would say that most people in my community know me because I went through a divorce, but not because I'm divorced. And I want them to be inspired by where we made love bigger than it originally thought it could inhabit. And I believe other people are on that same mission, and I love finding them and walking with them on the path for a short portion of it.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Everything you say, I want to just turn it into a quote. Make it go viral on the internet. So I'm assuming that originally pre-COVID that this was all face-to-face. You said you work nationally now. So are you on Zoom, or how does that work?
No, it's been virtual all the time. Yeah, divorce coaching has been virtual. They say it was Zooming before Zooming was cool. So yeah, it's always been virtual. And I often, honestly, I would say majority of my clients I do by phone call. And the reason is because when you're getting divorced, you sometimes need to have those conversations on the fly. You need to have them in a parking lot after work, or, out at a coffee shop away from your kids, or when you're out taking a walk. And so, and I find that some of them are struggling enough that they care not to be thinking about their appearance when they're meeting. And so it's just easier to focus in and have a notebook and kind of do it over the phone. So lots of different ways to do it.
I love it. So what is the best way for people to find you? And we will link, whether you're on YouTube or listening on the podcast, we will link in the description. But just for the listeners so they can get it into their brain, why don't you share the best way to find you right now?
Sure. Yes, you can find me at my website, which is AndreaHippsDivorceCoach.com. There's 2 P's in Hips. And I also post to Facebook and Instagram under that same handle. So feel free to look for me there. If you go to my website, you'll get a lot of handy tools on there. You can sign up to get a free communication guide for how to communicate with your partner even when they're difficult. And there's also a spot for you to schedule. I offer free complimentary 30-minute calls to just hear your situation if you want somebody to kind of vet it with you and see if it's more appropriate for coaching, or if you need to move into with a different professional. I'm happy to do that with you.
Oh, I love that. I want to yell that, repeat that for the people in the chat. There are free 30-minute calls and a free communication guide. Like
Yes.
what more? If you have any questions, any reservations, like go check out that and see how it feels with you. See if it resonates. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we hop off today?
Yeah, and on that website, just to also point out, I post a weekly blog on various tips and tricks of how to survive this difficult time in your life. And I also take suggestions from the audience. So if there's a particular issue that one of your audience members is struggling with, they can feel free to just email me and I can dive into it on the blog.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I just
Sure.
love you. I'm obsessed with what you're doing. Thank you for this riveting. And I feel like I'm not even in this situation, and I feel so empowered by what you're doing and what you're talking about. So just, I can't.
Oh, well, thank you. It was a blessing to be able to be here. And I hope that we were able to chat with a few people who just need a boost to get through this time right now.
Oh, I love it. Well, I will wish you happy holidays, sweetie, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Mwah.